Greetings, Dr. Mark Winton here from the Criminal Justice Department here at the University of Central Florida. And I'd like to make a brief presentation here on mistakes and errors and problems with reasoning, and maybe how to avoid some of these problems as it relates to court cases and criminal investigations. First, I'd just like to mention a few things from a really excellent book by Tavris and Aronson, published in 2007, titled Mistakes Were Made, But Not by Me, by Harcourt Press. And they point out several things that I'd like to mention that I think are very relevant for a variety of the courses that I teach, whether it is policy analysis, or serial murder, or criminal profiling, or law and social control, or famous crimes and trials. I think that these are some relevant themes that they point out. First, often people, when an error is made, they may acknowledge an error was made, but not responsibility. And so this error can then be repeated and made again over and over and over. And often when people believe something, they start justifying it. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that they believe something to be true, and it becomes true in its consequence. This is known as the Thomas theorem from sociology, that when people believe that situations are real, they become real in their consequences. The example I used to use years ago when I was teaching sociology, when I was a young man, was that I would say, if I'm swimming in the ocean here in Florida and I see a fin, my bodily reaction will be very different depending if I identify that fin as being either a shark or a dolphin. If it's a shark, I'm probably going to get nervous, sweat, my heart rate will increase, and I'll try to get away from it. If it is a dolphin, I'll probably watch it and be very pleased that I get to see this beautiful animal. If it's a piece of driftwood, well, who knows? It depends how I interpret the situation. This is very relevant when it comes to policies, how we interpret what we believe to be the case and believe that to be true, even when evidence is presented on the contrary. And they talk about cognitive dissonance, or holding two cognitions that are inconsistent or contradictory. We try to get those out of our head because they bother us, they make us anxious. We don't like ambivalence. We want to know, is it this or is it that? So often we're unable to see our own biases. Some of this, they recommend, can be controlled through the scientific method. Actually, they say that the scientific method can control arrogance. And so even though I've been in debates before where I said, well, according to scientific evidence, and the other person say, well, I don't believe the scientific evidence. I don't believe the people that did it. That doesn't make sense. I don't like it. And often the problem is that scientific evidence will be presented and then people just refute it without ever providing alternatives. One of the things that frustrated me, once I went to city council meeting, I presented scientific evidence on a topic for a friend of mine, and then afterwards people would come up and say what he just said was false, but they give no reason other than just their statement. And what frustrated me is I couldn't stand up again and say, well, why is it false? Where's the research that shows that? So I never have gone to another commissioners meeting since. There should be rebuttal. There should be, the scientific, discourse presented in a professional manner and challenged, which is fine. But just to write things off, that's a problem. Also, we can see, for example, I also teach a course in crime and mental disorders. And one of the things that, having worked in the field a very long time, an example that I'll use for a lot of political debate, I'll give you several, is, for example, recovered memory clinicians and therapy. And this was very popular in the 80s, where they believed that recovered memories would come out and that people would remember things that happened to them that really didn't. But they were treated as if they were real in fact. And according to Tavris and Aronson, that the extent of the problem and the damage done was minimized. And there's still some debate. But I actually remember going to conferences back in the 80s and 90s and seeing that this became such a big debate, whether there was recovered memories or not, that you would, in one situation, I actually saw a speaker who was against the idea of recovered memories get booed and yelled at. And one of my colleagues reported another speaker was tripped when he left the podium. And these are mental health professionals. But this is the intensity of the debate. I always was from the school of thought, let me read all the research and let me make a decision based on what the research shows. And if it doesn't go one way or the other, then I'm going to stay in that state of ambivalence. I'm okay with that cognitive dissonance in that sense. Also, the dismissal of science, I already mentioned, and attempts to make critics look bad. We see that, for example, in highly intense emotional debates. If we say, for example, there was a law that was passed that had to do with reporting of a missing child within a certain amount of time. Well, I think the professionals knew that the law was kind of a feel-good law, that if someone didn't report their child missing in a certain amount of time, there's probably some very devastating consequences that already have taken place, whether they report within a certain time or not. There's a good chance that child is deceased. And so I'd rather go in and say, well, how can we prevent this type of child death or homicide from occurring in the first place? And so sometimes we have these. Another example I would give you is that there are actually programs running in a variety of communities that I'm aware of that have been shown over and over and over and over by the research to not work, yet they keep getting funded and they keep implementing them and they keep going out and recruiting and presenting the programs. They do not work. What makes it even worse is that if you go up against some of these programs that have big bucks, they will have an attorney write you a letter and possibly threaten lawsuit for presenting the scientific research. I can tell you once I was going to present and I called up, or actually I emailed using an unidentifiable account so they wouldn't know who I was, and said, I'm going to present to my class all this research that shows your program doesn't work, but I'd like to give you the opportunity to send to me any academic, scientific research that shows that your program works, and I will be glad to review it, and I will present it to the class as well so we have a balanced presentation. Their response was, who are you and where do you work? Well, I never answered that, and you can see the implications right there. They didn't care. They just wanted to go after me to make sure that I wasn't saying anything negative about their program that has been shown over and over and over and over again not to work. But people get furious and upset when you tell them that. And this also occurs, we see in criminal investigations, this can occur. And we've seen, unfortunately, when there's been wrongful convictions or someone who is blamed for a crime that they did not commit, and even though there's certain indicators that would demonstrate, yes, they didn't, we still have this problem occurring. So we have this confirmation bias. And once we believe something, it's hard to say, no, that's not the case. And then also that we don't like to admit that there is a problem. And I can remember going into court, and I don't do that anymore either. And, a lot of times I'll say, I don't know, but sometimes I'll say, well, maybe and maybe not. Wow, talking about getting a bunch of people upset. They want yes, no, I don't know. But maybe or maybe not, I don't think that's allowed in the courtroom, but, maybe and maybe not, it should be. And so we see some of these scenarios as well. A fascinating study came out of the National Institute of Justice, and you can get this just by Googling the NIJ, titled Wrongful Conviction. What does science tell us about the causes? A lot of things related to trials is discussed in this really well put together document. And I'll just read to you the 10 factors that led to wrongful conviction of innocent defendants. To kind of give you an idea, these were risk factors for wrongful conviction. And I want you to think about how these might become and how they relate to what I just mentioned. Okay, a younger defendant, a criminal history, a weak prosecution case, prosecution withholding evidence, lying by a non-eyewitness, unintentional witness misidentification, misinterpreting forensic evidence at a trial, a weak defense, a defendant offered a family witness, and a punitive state culture. And so these are, factors and very important to look at that can lead to problems. And so the main thing here, I think, is to integrate the scientific research into policy making and investigative processes, and conducting ourselves in trials and the legal system. And to have that basically empirically derived or evidence-based practice that the healthcare people have been doing for years, to go ahead and take a look at that. For example, any pharmaceutical agent, it seems, has something called side effects. But I would guess that some programs we run in criminal justice have side effects, negative side effects, in fact, maybe unforeseen ones. And so we have to study those as well, the unintended consequences. We have to take a close look at costs and benefits. We have to evaluate, and we have to test, and we have to evaluate multiple times, and we have to compare and contrast when we have programs that are the same. And if we have programs that are different, we have to account for that as well. If different populations, for example, are studied, we have to look out for factors. For example, I remember one program had a much more successful, let me give you another example, that I once worked at a hospital, and the other competing hospital argued that they had a lower infant mortality rate of infants admitted to the ER, something like that. And we had a higher mortality rate. Well, look, what really got me is that they sent our hospital the worst cases. So of course we're going to have a higher infant mortality rate in that sense. And I pointed that out, and the other hospitals called on their on their fabrication, if you want to call that, of the data. And when we saw that, if you controlled for the extent of sickness and of the patients admitted to the hospital, you'd see that indeed hospitals basically were about the same. And so that, again, I'm sure in business and industry and marketing, all that, many things are probably the same, but they don't want to mention that or say that one thing is always, some argue one thing's better than another. But where is the evidence? And the subjectivity is fine in many cases for someone to have a preference, but to say one thing works better than another, we need the scientific data. And so with this, think about all those factors that go into how we conduct investigations, how we conduct trials, how we create and construct policies. And I know for myself, and I had this discussion with one of my excellent students a while back, is that he just loved the policy stuff. He said, man, I love this class. I love analyzing policy and looking at the debates. He said, but you, Mark, you get frustrated by it, don't you? And I said, yeah, I do. And he said, it's interesting because we were about the same age and working in the field about the same amount of time. We had different reactions. He found it as a challenge. I just got headache after headache and frustrated because I do not know how to present it in a way to create change. That it just doesn't work, because I've tried it before, and I've said to managers or officials, whatever, said, you know what, this just doesn't work. What you're doing doesn't work. In fact, here's the research stack that shows it doesn't work. That doesn't work. So I don't know. That's a whole nother topic in itself. But what I do recommend is always challenge yourself. Always be critical of your work. Always have the possibility that you could be wrong. I mean, my students in my undergrad classes will catch mistakes that I make on the exams, miscoding, errors that I make, a wrong word that changes, what the answer, and they point it out, and I check it, and if it's a mistake, I correct it, I give them the credit where it's due, and everyone's happy. But I've heard that sometimes someone would say, no, I'm not going to change or look at anything. That is terrible. Of course, we need to self-reflect. We need to become reflexive. We need to look back at what we've been doing and the results, and we need to take a tough look at that. And so I get frustrated by it, but not too frustrated, because it's still fun and challenging in that sense, even though I've kind of lost my hope that I'm going to make any changes at all. But I do think that others will, because there'll be an accumulation of data, there'll be others. And I'll wrap up with one example. Having some other stuff going on in a meeting, and I said, well, here's what I see going on, and I laid it out, and one of the very politically savvy individuals said, Mark, those are some excellent ideas. We just got to find someone who can present that in a tactful way. That I can't teach you, because I don't know tactful way of presenting. I was basically, here it is. And that's what I'm used to in that sense. But that's an important part as well. So in many of the courses, what I've tried to do is to give you a nice overview and integration of the research and the data, and how you present it. That you're going to have to work with, and some of you will be able to present it a lot better than I can, certainly. And that's an important component as well. So I hope that, again, that this is a video of self-reflection on how we conduct ourselves in investigating cases, and the assumptions we make about how things occur, why they occur, who did what to whom, and so on and so forth, and are able to continue to be critically evaluating as we progress in our work. And this wraps up this video. Thank you.